Hi, I'm William Bryant, and this is my video companion to the budget article that I wrote for my Substack. This will be quick. I want to put together something under 15 minutes, but a little explainer or deeper explanation of some of the aspects of the sale budget that I might have missed. But it also gives you the ability to see me interact and explain some of my thought processes behind it. So the sales budget, which is the hinge of your master budget, being that every other budget really relies on the numbers that you come up with. And since you're going to be producing, allocating resources, perhaps further investment to actually meet the anticipated revenues, this is a pretty important thing. There are a couple of ways you can go about forecasting out or projecting sales. You can do it statistically. Hopefully a lot of research goes into it. And what I mean by research when I mention it from a statistical aspect is that absolutely yes, if you have historic patterns in your revenues and you don't deviate too much from your max and your mins, or maybe you have certain seasonality or cycles to your sales, and you can use, say, ARIMA models to forecast out. And all that really is doing is just, it's a type of regression that really just reads out patterns, and it'll create that pattern going forward. And so statistically, it's fairly solid, representative wise to what you're going to see in historic patterns. If you have that, fantastic. It's a great way to go about it. I also mentioned Monte Carlos. The reason why is because perhaps you don't have a deep historic database of financials. You need to kind of come up with something on the fly. If you do enough research, say, on other companies and their revenues, the lack of a deep database doesn't really give you anything to draw from. So if you conduct research on competitor lines, their available financials, perhaps I use a bakery or a coffee shop as an example, and perhaps you sit in a few different locations and you track the number of individuals and what they order. And maybe you do this for a few months just to give you an idea. Then perhaps you use the simulations and you look at the average number of a particular unit sold on a given day, the range, the variance, standard deviation of the number of units sold, and you just let that run, and maybe 1,000, 2,000 times it'll run for each product that you decide to implement, and give you some numbers that you can then compile and put together, and those price points that you've used will give you a rough estimate for revenues. That is an option that you can do. Yes, it takes time. It's not really great for huge companies, but smaller firms, especially small businesses that maybe will have limited product lines and do have direct competitors that you can research. For larger firms, to a certain degree, you may be able to find public companies, division segments that they may track that will have unit and revenue information. Some do, some don't. It really depends. But yes, you can use this to approximate product lines, price points. Perhaps there's a range of prices and a range of units within those prices, and you can use the distribution as a probability distribution and use that to simulate many times, which is using it as a Monte Carlo type simulation where you can give a rough estimate and then work from there. It's not Obviously, it won't be as accurate if you have solid historic trends of numbers, but it gives you a foundation from which you can go. Best case scenario, hopefully, is that you've got a data diligent marketing department that tracks their promos, their pricings, the units sold, total number of best case scenario is that you have a very data diligent marketing department that perhaps tracks everything from customer, as many demographic and socioeconomic data points that they can possibly acquire in your customer base. They track their promotions, pricings, various quantities sold at different pricings, which promotions work the best and why when they run their promotions, and their add-on in terms of units sold or total revenues while those promotions were ongoing. I know marketing is always interesting because it always seems like the rabbit hole that you dump investment in. It is very hard to see what your return on that investment is, but there are things that you can get out of it, and at least good approximations, especially if you do have promotion or advertising seasons, and you know that maybe in the spring and in the winter you have your two big sales because you're going out of summer and you're coming into summer or what have you, depending on your product type. But they hopefully will be able to give you the rundown on what they're going to see, how much their spend is, what the return on spend is, or at least a rough estimate, so you have somewhere to go from, so that you can really understand how you should put in your units sold and revenues, and why you should. You can actually support that with real numbers. And if you've watched my master budget quick vid or read the article that I've written, you know that this is also why I believe in more of a participative, supportive, coordinated budgeting plan, because of the fact that other areas should have good solid data that you can use to piece together this budget and operational planning, so that you get the most out of your dollar, and there's not a lot of error in the budgeting process, because as financing becomes more expensive, which we see with higher rates, and contrary to what I think a lot of people believe, we're not going to see lower rates, but financing is more expensive. You don't have the ability really to have slack in your process that you have to pay for. You don't have that slack, which kind of, error. You want to be as dead on as you possibly can. And so when you're looking at the source of your cash flow ins, and which is going to be your revenues, obviously, and all of the supporting costs that are going to have to go into making those revenues possible, which are going to be those cash outflows, you don't want to be wrong. Once you've invested that time and money into production, resources, inventory, what have you, it's pretty tough to go back to creating a liquid asset so that you can use to reinvest somewhere else. You've already put your money into it, so don't make the mistakes. Plan out your pricing. And to expand on this a little bit, when you're doing your budgeting, I do in my article show you the impacts of sales volume variance, and that's due to the fact that different sales line that you're going to sell are going to have different prices and different margins. And you'd be surprised if times come about or occurrences pop up where your core competency, your main product, suddenly doesn't become your primary seller. And perhaps you have a product that has a higher price and higher margin, and that becomes your primary seller. All of a sudden revenues are increasing 15%, and you don't really know why. Well, I mean, you know why, but you don't really know why in terms of, is this going to be a continuing trend into the future, or is this just something that came about because of the particular environment you were in? I saw this personally, and when those revenues jumped and those run rates were planned out, it was based on that product mix and those prices, which had those margins in them. And sure enough, it, if you were to look deeper into it, there were enough explanations, or enough supporting evidence, I should say, to suggest that it was not going to continue forward. Yet, when doing run rates and planning based upon that amount coming in, it's kind of like planning, if you recall from my master budget one, planning your personal finances based on the overtime you make. Suddenly that overtime maybe gets cut. Maybe you're not allowed to work as many overtime hours or any overtime hours at all. Any plans that you made based upon working hours at that higher rate, or that, or getting that much more income based upon those hours worked, it goes away. It's the same thing for a company. If you're not planning for your sales volume mix properly and looking at the products that you're selling. So if you do look at that sales budget, I do display, and that's one of the things about your process. Whatever you do in your carry forward, regardless of how you're planning out your revenues, whether you're actually using statistical methods or you're using say your marketing department, you're freezing your distribution, you're freezing your mix in time, and that's what you're going to use going forward. So you do need to have the ability to look at the sensitivity in revenues changing depending on which types of units are being sold. And I do try to do that. I break it into price tiers. You have the 6 price tiers: high margin, low margin, high margin, low margin. And I know not all companies are going to have that, but really that's what you're looking at. Like, you're going to have maybe your luxury, your normal, and say, I mean, from an economic term, you say inferior goods, but really it's your budget goods. And depending on, you may have, each level is going to be a higher margin and a lower margin for your luxury items. Maybe you're trying to compete on, compete on cost and luxury maybe. But maybe you're just trying to enter, and that's where it's coming in. So you're trying to enter in with some market share. And I mean, it's still high price for a lot of folks, but maybe not for the people who are within that customer base for that particular product line. And so on down. You have your normal goods. You'll have some that'll have higher margins, and some that'll be more based on your cost plus. And you're really just getting by. You're working off of your cost leadership model for maybe a couple of segments. And so that's what I try to display. And so within the pricing tier, I do show product 1, product 2, product 3, and how just changes in one product within one pricing tier, especially if it's on your higher end, can impact total revenue substantially within that modeling. So if you get a chance, just take a look at it and consider the fact that you do have these issues that arise, and you do have trends in consumer behavior and buying habits, sometimes impacted by the environment you were in. And if you are trying to create a budget and you're going to try to carry them forward, are you carrying forward something that isn't going to trend into the future? And that's really important to understand and try to get a grip on and differentiate your core supporting, really what you're known for in terms of products, from other products that maybe just suddenly became that star, and aren't really the cash cows. Maybe the cash cows had a downturn, if you know those terms on product lines. But that's what I'm really trying to get across when I'm discussing the sales budget. And of course that, the next one will lead into the production budget. But the fact is that in order to support these various products and these various tiers and these various product lines, all that planning that has to then go into, okay, well, we need this type of material for this type of material for this. this factory, this labor, and so on. All of this is going to go into it. So that's why it is so important to get the best numbers you possibly can, and to coordinate with both marketing and the marketing sales teams, and probably with operations as well, although they'll have less to do with the sales side depending on what kind of responsibility center they are, but they will have input into the as we go into the line for the production and the purchasing of the materials, labor, and ending inventory aspect. All of these are considerations that have to go into it, even though you're just at the sales budget level. And that's why I say the sales budget is that hinge, because yes, everything works off of that. And then just consider what I was mentioning and how much, in terms of a cost basis, goes into all of these things that I just said. But if you were just treating it as a run rate, and you were just going to carry the revenues forward and the given distribution of units, for some companies that's a possibility. For some, I mean, is that the best way to do it? Is it realistic? And that's just kind of a thought. If you're a smaller business, you can probably be a little bit more dynamic and take a little bit more of a look at it. And obviously you're going to probably have tighter purse strings, and so you might benefit substantially from the understanding or the due diligence done into your sales budget and the pricing tiers and how you project out the units and revenues. So that's a little bit on the sales budget. Thank you.